Alright, welcome back to another Pulling Threads video. Today I am super excited to share with you one of the most delightful books I have read in the last couple years, probably. And that is called the Kalevala. Now, I first heard the title Kalavala in Lewis's Perelandra. It's listed there with a couple other books. But it wasn't until I actually started reading the Kalevala that I realized it was a much heavier influence on Tolkien. In fact, Tolkien even lifted large sections of the plot out of the Kalevala and put them smack in the middle of the Silmarillion and called them his own, which I'm fine with. But maybe we'll do another video later about just how much Tolkien was influenced by the Kalevala. For now, I just want to introduce you to the delightful hilarity that it is. And I'm going to do that by showing you a character who's actually kind of Bombadil-esque. But let me give you a little bit of background first, and then we'll jump into it. So the Kalevala was actually written in the 1800s by a guy whose name looks like Lönnrot. But what he actually did was compile a bunch of old folk narratives that had been passed down orally. And because of this, the text actually still retains a bit of that old oral tradition. Most notably, this comes across in repetition, and I mean a lot of repetition. Like, this book would be half the length that it is if it didn't repeat itself, I think. But I love it, and it works, and I'll explain why. So some of it's in larger chunks that are quoted almost verbatim throughout the entirety of the book. One example of this is the fact that one of the characters is often referred to as Steady Old Väinamoinen, the everlasting wise man. And they give him that whole title many of the times that he's referred to. He also often thinks, he considers, how to be, which way to live in these evil days when time is running out. And these things are repeated throughout the text as almost a poetic refrain. But these chunks had the added benefit of allowing the oral presenter to pace the narrative if he needed to and remember what he was going to say next. Similarly, though way more frequently, the idea given in one line of the poem is immediately repeated in the next line of the poem with slight variations. For example, when one of the water folk is coming up out of the water to cut down an oak tree that's blocking the sun, he's described by the narrator as being not as small goes, nor as big goes, but as tall as a man's thumb, as high as a woman's span. So these similar ideas are often directly contradictory to one another because a man's thumb is not the same size as a woman's span, but they both give the same impression, and that is that the guy was really tiny. And so as I read this book, I began to see these repetitions as a sort of rhyming, but not the rhyming of similar sounds, but instead the rhyming of similar ideas. And they just make this book such a delight to read, at least for me. So let's go ahead and jump into it because the sun is going down. We'll be looking at Canto 3 today, which starts off with two dueling wizards. But instead of casting spells by waving wands or waving staffs, they actually sing. That's how they cast their spells. And this canto starts off with Steady Old Väinamoinen, the everlasting wise man, doing just that. Singing, and singing away on the land where he lives, and has lived since time began. See, I told you he was Bombadil. So let's see what he's singing about. So it says, he sang day by day, night by night he recited, ancient memories, those deep origins, which not all the children sing, only fellows understand, in this evil age with time running out. As he's singing, he's so good at it that word of him spreads across the land. Eventually, the young Jókunheinin, a lean, lappish lad, hears of his singing and is completely overwhelmed with envy for his abilities, and decides that he wants to go challenge Steady Old Väinamoinen to a duel. He's promptly warned by both his father and his mother, who say that Väinamoinen is so good at singing, he will sing Jókunheinen's face into snow, his head into drifts. But Jókunheinen is young, and so he responds by saying, my father's wisdom is good, my mother's even better, but my own is the highest. And so he hitches his fiery steed to his golden sleigh and rides off recklessly after Väinamoinen. And he's riding so recklessly that he actually smashes into Väinamoinen in his own sleigh, causing a kerfuffle. And when he does this, Väinamoinen asks him, of what kin are you, coming foolishly forward, this way recklessly, smashing my sleigh to splinters, into bits the toboggan? To this, Jotunheinen says, I'm young Jotunheinen. Vainamoinen responds by saying, since you're young Jotunheinen, draw aside a bit. You're younger than me. But Jotunheinen doesn't want to do that. He says that not a bit does a man's youth, his youth or his age matter. Who is better in wisdom, mightier in recalling? Let him stand fast on the road, the other shift off the road. Let us start singing, he says. So he's challenging Vainamoinen to this duel. So Vainamoinen's like, okay, fine. You want to see who's wiser? Tell me what you know best. He says, what do you know most about? Understand above others. And young Jotunheinen said, well, I know a thing or two. This I know plainly and grasp thoroughly. The smoke hole is in the roof. The flame is in the hearth. So he's saying all these things that are very obvious and not deep wisdom at all. He continues by adding more things. The whitefish's fields are smooth. The salmon's roof is level. Water is level. Of course it is. Maybe sensing the weakness of his wisdom, he continues on, should not enough come of that, I know other wisdom too. I'm aware of one thing, the north plowed with reindeer, the south with the mare. Okay, sure, whatever, Jotunheinen. And after young Jotunheinen says many other things that are equally as unimpressive as that, steady old Vainamoinen responds saying, child's wisdom, woman's recall, is for no bearded fellow, nor for a man with a wife. Tell me of deep origins, of eternal things. And Jotunheinen tries, but all he says is that a viper is a snake, and that a tomtit is a bird. He says iron I know is brittle, black soil is bitter? Why does he know that soil is bitter? And hot water hurts, and a burn is bad. So obviously he's not doing anything to impress Vainamoinen. Vainamoinen eventually says, do you recall any more, or has your babble ended? Maybe a little desperate now, young Jotunheinen lies and says that he was there at creation and starts trying to describe it. He says, I recall a bit more too. Now I recall such a time as I was plowing the sea, grubbing the sea's gulfs, digging the fish troughs. I was the sixth man, the seventh fellow, when the earth was made. And old Vainamoinen, the everlasting wise man, who was there, calls him out on this, saying that he wasn't there when the earth was created, kind of like how God calls Job out for not being there when the earth was founded. Vainamoinen says, truly you have lied. You were never seen when the sea was plowed, when the sea's gulfs were grubbed. Eventually, young Jotunheinen admits defeat in the battle of wisdom and decides instead to try to fight with the sword. Young Jotunheinen at that put this into words, since I do not have the wits, I shall ask wits of my sword. And Vainamoinen's response is to say, I shall not much fear those swords of yours, wits of yours, those ice picks, those tricks of yours. I'll not let the sword decide with you, you mean boy. Then Jotunheinen threatens to sing him into a pig if he doesn't let the sword decide. And this angers Vainamoinen. Vainamoinen himself started singing, himself began reciting. The songs are not children's songs, woman's cackle, but for a bearded fellow, which not all the children sing, nor do half the boys, nor a third of the suitors, in this evil age with time running out. And Vainamoinen's spells, his songs, completely undo young Jotunheinen. They turn his sleigh into a tree trunk, his whip into reeds, his horse into rocks, his crossbow into a rainbow. He even sings his clothes into bits of nature, like his cap he sings into a cloud and his mittens into lilies. But finally, he sang him, Jotunheinen, in a swamp up to his waist, in a meadow to his groin, in the heath to his armpits. So he sings him into the ground. But I love that we don't know what kind of ground he sung him into, or even how deep he was sung into this ground, because these beautiful rhyming ideas are all different. We just know it was bad for young Jotunheinen. So bad that he says, shrewd Vainamoinen, O everlasting wise man, whirl your holy words around, take back your phrases. So he kind of pleads for mercy, saying that he'll give him whatever he wants. Vainamoinen's intrigued by this and is like, fine, what will you give me if I let you go? So young Jotunheinen says, well, I've got 2 crossbows, do you want one of them? And old Vainamoinen says, I don't care for your crossbows, I have some myself. stacked up against every wall, and so he sings him deeper into the ground. So Jolkenhainen offers boats instead, and Vainamoinen says, I don't want your boats either. I have some myself, stored up in every cove. And he sings him deeper into the ground. Then Jolkenhainen offers horses, and the same thing with horses. Vainamoinen has plenty of them, so he sings them deeper. Jolkenhainen offers gold and silver, but Vainamoinen has plenty of that as well, so he sings him deeper still. Then he offers land, and Vainamoinen has that too, and he sings them even further down. Finally, desperate Jolkenhainen offers his sister in exchange for his freedom. It says, Then the young Jolkenhainen was at his wit's end, up to his chin in the slime, to his beard in the bad place, to his mouth in swamp mosses, his teeth stuck in a tree trunk. And he says, Shrewd Vainamoinen, O everlasting wise man, sing your song backwards, spare yet my weak life, I'll give Aino, my sister. And at the prospect of having someone take care of him in his old age, Vainamoinen is delighted. So he sang one moment, sang two, sang a third moment as well, whirled his holy words away, took back his phrases. Young Jolkenhainen was free, with his chin out of the slime, his beard out of the bad place, and all his implements turned back to what they should be. So free at last, young Jolkenhainen jumps into his sleigh, which is now a sleigh again, and rides off home, very heartbroken that he had to offer his sister in exchange for his freedom. And he's so heartbroken that he drives recklessly again. It says, He drove home oddly, smashed his sledge against the kiln, the shafts to bits on the steps. His parents are frustrated and asked why he came home so stupidly. At that, young Jolkenhainen weeps, a flood of tears, his head down in bad spirits, helmet all askew, his lips grimly set, his nose drooped over his mouth. And they ask him why he's so upset. And he says, I have given my sister Aino, pledged my mother's child to care for Vainamoinen, to be mate for the singer. And it turns out, oddly, that his mother's thrilled at the prospect. She says, Don't weep, my offspring, there's nothing to weep for. This I've hoped for all my days, longed my lifetime through, a great man for my kin, a bold man for my stock, Vainamoinen for my son-in-law. But as might be expected, his sister is a little less enthused. And when her mother asks her why she's not excited about the prospect, Aino responds, For this I'll weep all my days, for the sweetness of the sun, for the splendid moonlight's grace, for all the sky's loveliness. If while young I must leave them, as a child leave them behind. And her mom tries to comfort her by saying, There is no cause to be glum, no reason to be downcast. God's sun also shines elsewhere in the world, not at your father's windows, your brother's gateway. So the canto ends there, with the mother trying to comfort her daughter that she's being sent away to be Vainamoinen's wife. And I'll not spoil how it goes after that. Basically, this book follows Vainamoinen and another guy as they go off and are always trying to get a girl and never quite can figure out how to do that. Most of the time it's hilarious and whimsical, sometimes it's a bit tragic. Zombies come in later on, and so does this thing called the magical Sampo, which generates infinite resources, so people have to fight over that. But it's just a real true delight, and I highly recommend you check it out, because there's no way that I could do it justice without just reading the whole thing, which is done on Audible anyway, so you should just go listen to it there, and if you like it, buy a copy of it, and that's exactly what I did. I got about a quarter of the way through it, and I was like, this is too wonderful, I have to buy it. And so I bought it and read it properly. And I highly recommend this Oxford World Classics edition. It's translated by Keith Bosley and has a lot of great notes to help explain some of the parts in it. But mostly it's a really easy read, unlike a lot of other epics that are out there, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, which I find utterly delightful. So I hope you got a taste of why Tolkien and Lewis loved it so much. I'll see you next time.